Thank you, choir. I hadn't heard that song in a long time. And that was so very, very good. Take your Bibles, turn to 1 John chapter 3. 1 John chapter 3, Genesis chapter 4, Acts chapter 4, and Romans chapter 5. 1 John chapter 3, Genesis chapter 4, Acts chapter 4, and Romans chapter 5. All of you have heard that little phrase, hurt people, hurt people. And not only have you probably heard that, you have probably felt that, maybe you have even done that, because hurt people want to hurt people. And it's when anger becomes bitterness, and sometimes that bitterness turns to hate, and so hurt people hurt people. Someone hurts you, and it hurts so much you want to hurt them back. And often you want to hurt them more than they hurt you. But since you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you, because hurt people hurt people. And so there's probably a chance that when I said hurt people, they even came to your mind. Those people, that person who hurt you, and you just every time they come to every time they even come in your mind, it causes you to have this strange feeling inside, whether it's anxiety or just these harsh thoughts about them. And you don't want to be around them, and you don't want to think about them. And when you do, your spirit just drops. Just the mention of their name. And of course, that's a terrible way to live. And so here we are. We're back in 1 John this morning, and John wants to help us discover a different way to live, a better way to live. You'll remember last week when we looked at 1 John, he taught us, since I am a child of God, I live like a child of God. And if you're not a child of God, then you're not going to live like a child of God, and we should not expect someone who's not a child of God to live like a child of God. Since Jesus has said, I am righteous, then I should live righteous. Righteous people live righteous lives. Unrighteous people live unrighteous lives. And so who we are determines how we live. So that's what we learned from 1 John last week. This week, John kind of continues in the message, and he says this. 1 John chapter 3, verse 11, For this is the message that you heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. So that's the message that you've heard from the beginning. That's the message that you've heard from me from the beginning. What did I say it was? It was 1 year, 7 months, and I can't even remember what I read. Yeah, and how many seconds? Oh, wow. It's really bad. So sorry. You'll get over it one day. But from the very beginning, anywhere I go, and anytime I go into a new church and begin entering in that church, I always go back to the beginning, which is love. Love one another. That's how I start. I start by talking about love, because the message is love. The Bible, cover to cover, is about love. The Bible says God is love. All of you know the verse, For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that so whoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. It is love. Love is part of the Old Testament. Love is sometimes given to us as a commandment. The Bible tells us to love our enemies. Hurt people hurt people. The Bible says, love your enemies, not hurt your enemies. The Bible tells us husbands to love our wives. The top level of love is the unconditional love of God. It's mentioned in the Bible 320 times, all of that in the New Testament. It's that word agape that talks about this tremendous love of God. And the New Testament teaches us that a saved person, that their nature is to be controlled by love. We shouldn't even have to preach this, but just by nature, we should love one another. That should just be the way it is. That is the message that we heard from the beginning. And the message never changes. And you know that. The way we do things in church, that will change from time to time, but the message will never change. It's always the same. Jesus gave this message to his disciples on the night that he would be betrayed. Judas has already left. They are in the upper room. Jesus looks at his disciples and he says, "A new commandment that I give to you, as I have loved you, you are to love one another." We are to love one another just as Jesus loves us. God has shown us a great amount of love, and our natural response to that would be to show great love to one another. It's simply what we should do. We are to love one another. We all know that the world we live in is filled with so much hate. It's filled with this hate for one another. Publicly, I am not very political. Privately, I am very, very political. And I see that line in politics that is deeply divided, and what divides it is hate. It is this hate for one another. A believer is supposed to love one another. So John says, "For this is the message that you heard from the beginning, that we should love one another." And I think for the most part, we Christians, we're pretty decent at that. We do pretty good at that, with the exception of that one person that hurt you. Because hurt people hurt people. Hurt people hurt people. And John knows that, so John deals with that, and you have to love the way he deals with it. We've said this from the beginning. John's a black and white guy. There are no gray areas for John. It's either black or white. And so here's what John says. Verse 12, he's contrasting loving one another, and he contrasts it with this guy by the name of Cain. He says, verse 12, "Not as Cain." So he's right off the bat, he just tells us, you don't be like Cain. You are not to act like Cain. You are not to be like Cain. Not as Cain, who was of the wicked one. So Cain belonged to the devil. Not as Cain, who was of the wicked one and murdered his brother. Why did he murder him? Because his works were evil. Cain's works were evil, and his brother's righteous. Now I wanted to show you what John is talking about and where he got this from. So hold your place in 1 John and go with me to Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4. This is simply the story of Cain and Abel. You know it well, but it is worth reading it again and just reminding ourselves what had happened. It's Genesis chapter 4, And verse 1, it says this, Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived. So, for the first time ever, a woman is pregnant. And every time I read this, I kind of think about this. That just brings up all kind of questions to my mind, because they've never seen a pregnant woman before. No one's ever been pregnant before. Eve is the first woman who's ever been pregnant. She has no example of what it's like to be pregnant. Adam and Eve, not once in their life have they seen a woman who was pregnant. This is all new. And I don't know what she knew. I don't know if she had any idea how pregnancy worked. I don't know if God had this conversation with Eve and he just laid it out all for her about this is how pregnancy works and this is how it's going to go. I wonder what God said to her, if anything at all. And when did she know she was pregnant? Was it when she started putting on a little weight and the belly started getting big and Adam's going, what's going on here? Cut out the sugar, you know? I don't know what they were thinking. Did she know in 9 months that she was going to have a baby? We don't know what she knew. But one day, she started having this intense pain. And the next thing you know, she has a baby, and it's a baby boy. Now, Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. So Eve said, with the help of God, I have required a man. And she didn't say little man. She said, I have acquired a man. Maybe he was a big boy, right? I have acquired a man. Now, if you go back and you look at the Hebrew, that word for man there, it simply means male. You know why? Because God created male and female, that's it.
Amen.
It's one or the other. That's it. Nothing else. So, Eve had a baby. Verse 2, then she bore again. Most people believe that means that she had twins. But we really don't know. We don't know. It says, then she bore again. We don't know if it was a few minutes later. We don't know if it was a year later. But she bore again, this time his brother Abel. And now Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. So the first family had the first children, and it was 2 boys. Two boys. And then verse 3, and in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Verse 4, Abel also brought the first fruit of his flock and of their fat, and the Lord respected Abel and his offering. But verse 5, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And there's a lot of debate as to why God accepted Abel's offering and he didn't accept Cain's offering. Many think it had something to do with maybe the attitude of Cain. Maybe his offerings were offered in the wrong attitude. You know, in the Bible, in the New Testament, it talks about whenever you and I decide to give, whenever we decide to give an offering, that we are not to do that reluctantly or under compulsion. You know, we're not to be guilted into it, forced into it. For God loves a cheerful giver. So maybe Cain wasn't a cheerful giver. Maybe he was an angry giver. Others think maybe it was because Cain didn't offer a blood offering, a blood sacrifice, because it was a blood sacrifice was the requirement for salvation. We don't know what it was. But whatever Cain did, it was the wrong offering. Maybe it was his attitude, maybe it was what he brought, but whatever it was the wrong thing. And Cain's response to it all, and it says this, and Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. And then verse 6, so the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? Why do you have this sour look on your face? What's wrong with you? Verse 7, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at your door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. So, it's very evident Cain is struggling with sin. He has this sin problem. And he has this attitude now with God, and God is lovingly trying to correct him, and he's pointing out to him, Cain, if you will do what is right, you will be accepted. And that makes me think that he wanted that blood sacrifice. Again, I don't know for sure. But Cain, if you will do what is right, you will be accepted. But if you do not, sin, it just lies at your door and it's waiting to, just destroy you. Sin is powerful. And you have to rule over it or it will rule over you. Sin will ruin a life. It's ruined many lives. And I believe, and I don't know, but I believe that probably Adam taught Cain and Abel the kind of offering that they should take to God and the attitude in which you should bring that offering to God. And Cain probably knew, I'm sure he knew, what was right. But God rejected his offering because it wasn't right. And Cain should have known this, and Cain should have dealt with it in the right way. Cain also should have gone to his brother and said, I'm sorry, Abel. I've had the wrong attitude about all of this, and I kind of got a little bitter with you about this. I was bitter about God with this. I'm so sorry, but that's not the conversation Cain had with Abel. Instead, verse 8, now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass that then when they were in the field, Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. And that's the story, that's the background that John gives us in 1 John chapter 3. So if you want to go back to 1 John chapter 3. It's simply the story of Cain's offering, and his offering is rejected, and he was hurt. And when Cain was hurt, he chose to hurt those who hurt him. And he went to the extreme, and he killed his brother. So back to 1 John chapter 3 and verse 12, John warns us, not as Cain, don't be like Cain, not as Cain who was of the wicked one. So we are clearly instructed not to be like Cain. We are to love one another. We're not to be like Cain, who was of the wicked one. He's controlled by the wicked one. He is of the wicked one. He acts like the wicked one. We're not to be like that. And this little section of the Bible, it teaches us so many lessons. I could do 100 sermons off of that one verse, because it implies so much about you and I and the way we act and controlling our anger. And we have to, in life, to learn to let go of things. You can't just hold on to everything and just let it eat away at your heart, because if you do, it's going to turn to bitterness. And so John goes, You can't. You can't be like Cain and hold on to that junk. Instead, we are to love one another because that's what believers do. Because that's who we are. We're not like Cain. We don't belong to the wicked one. And so we are to love one another. Cain, who was of the wicked one, murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his works were evil and his brother's righteous. Verse 13, do not marvel, my brethren, if the world hates you. And I have to admit, I'm still surprised by that. I'm still surprised sometimes at why the world would hate the things I do, hate the things I say. It still surprises me, though I've been told over and over in God's Word not to be surprised by that. Not to be surprised that the world hates me, because that is how the world is. That's how the world's going to be. That's how the world has always been. And every day of my life, it seems like traditional Christianity is under attack. It's because the world hates us. And one of the reasons the world hates us is because of what we just read. Cain and Abel. Because Abel did what was right, Cain did what was evil. And so Cain hated Abel for doing what was right. And today the world hates you for doing what is right. For doing righteous things. And for taking a stand against what is wrong. They hate us for that. As a matter of fact, sometimes things that I say from the pulpit, preaching God's Word, in the world that we live in today, that's considered hate speech. And I promise you it's not. It's not from my heart. It's not hate speech. It's God's Word. But the world hates it because it hates what is right. And we stand up for what is right and what is evil. That's why the world hates us. But the world really hates us because we're Christians. The world hates us because it hated Christ first. That's why the world really hates us. You know, I was thinking about this when I was working on the sermon. You would think that the world would love Jesus because he came to rescue the world from death and hell. You would thought, oh wow, he's the greatest thing ever. They didn't think that at all. You would have thought that the world would love Jesus because he healed the sick. They didn't think that at all. As a matter of fact, they thought, he healed the sick on the Sabbath. And they wanted to kill him for it. You would think the world would love Jesus because he was able to feed thousands with 2 loaves of bread. Or, 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. Instead, they would hate him and put him to death. The world hates you because the world hates Christ. The world hates you, and so naturally, when you stand up for right, they're going to hate you even more. So John says, don't marvel at that. Don't be amazed by that. Don't be surprised by that. Yet, poor little dumb little Glenn is still surprised by that sometimes. Do not marvel, my brethren, if the world hates you. That's just the way it is. That's how it's going to be for the Christian. So we are not to be amazed by it. Then verse 14, we know that we have passed from death to life. That simply means that we pass from eternal death to eternal life. We are born again. We are of Christ. We have been saved. We know that we have passed from death to life. And then John gives us the proof of that. Because we love the brethren? Because we love one another. Because we love the family of God. On the other hand, he who does not love his brother abides in death, remains in death. When we are saved, it's a funny thing, and it was so amazing to me that 1 minute I'm living life and I'm thinking one way. And then the next minute, I've given my life to Christ. And I want you to know immediately, I started thinking another way. Now, it wasn't like that with everything in life. But there was an immediate change in my overall thought system when I passed from death to life. Because when we are saved, one of the main characteristics of a Christian will be to love one another. And John says, if that's not true in your life, he who does not love his brother, he abides in death. Again, John's simply black and white. It's either light or darkness. There's no in between. You are one or the other. And so, as Christians, we are to love one another. Go with me, hold your place in 1 John. Quickly go with me to Acts chapter 4 and verse 34. Anyone watching the young church, the first church, they knew these people are really different. And the reason they knew they were really different is because of the way they loved one another. It was just absolutely amazing. It was really beyond amazing. It's Acts chapter 4, verse 34. Look at what it says. Nor was there anyone among them who lacked. And my first question is, how in the world? How in the world was that possible? How in the world did they accomplish such a thing? Because we haven't seen it since, and you didn't see it before. It was so unique what they did. Nor was there anyone among them who lacked. For all who were possessors of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of the things that were sold. Verse 35, and laid them at the apostles' feet, and they distributed to each as anyone had need. How in the world did they do this? How was this community of believers able to completely eliminate the need in the community of believers? How could they possibly do that? Well, you just read it, preacher. They sold all their possessions. They distributed the money to anyone who had need. It's that simple. But no. That's not it. It wasn't their possessions. It wasn't their property. It wasn't their resources. Because I would think that the church of the 21st century has far more resources than this first church did. And we don't eliminate all needs. We don't eliminate every need out there in the church community. Because it's not the resources. It was a heart thing. It was because they loved one another. We don't need more resources. We just need genuine love for one another. Their love for one another, they proved it in what they did. Now, again, I could be wrong here. I just don't think American churches need more resources. We have plenty. We can do just about anything we want to do. Maybe, it's just we need more love. So back to 1 John chapter 3, verse 14, John says this. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love the brethren. He who does not love his brother abides in death. So we should see in the life of every believer love for one another. And John says it's a pretty good sign that you're not a believer if you don't love one another. So once again, John's just being bold. He sees everything in the black and white. And so he continues, verse 15, whoever hates his brother is a murderer. Who was the first person to bring that up? Jesus. Remember on the Sermon on the Mount? He equates hate and anger with murder. He says it's all the same. That when you hate or you have this kind of anger towards someone, you are in the same judgment. You deserve the same judgment as that person who has killed another person, who has unjustly killed another person. That's a very destructive thing. When you unjustly take the life of someone else. So he says, whoever hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. So John's, he's saying we're dealing with a very serious subject here. He says, God is love, and God gives life. Anger and hate can lead to taking a life that God has given. And he's saying, if you have that spirit living in you, you're not a true believer. You see if there's any gray area here. It's what he's saying. He's saying if they have this spirit of this murderous, hateful, angry spirit in them, surely they couldn't have the eternal life of the Holy Spirit living in him, because God is love. And you would be spreading that love all around, not taking that from people. And so John, he continues this thought through the whole letter of 1 John. It's always a very clear contrast, because he's wanting to point us to one main thing: loving one another. And that doesn't mean just loving Faulks Baptist, the people of Faulks Baptist. He's talking about loving all believers. Loving believers because we are family. Love is to define who the Christian is. It should be who we are, what we are about, and what we do. We should always be found loving one another. Verse 16, by this we know love, because he laid down his life for us. There you go. There's a good definition for love. Jesus loved us so much, he laid his life down for us. The cross is love. That's what it's all about. And we also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. Now, so you see the contrast. That's the complete opposite of what Cain did. Cain murdered his brother instead of laying his life down for his brother, instead of loving his brother. And so as Christ lives in us, it becomes possible for us to love one another in even a sacrificial kind of love. And then verse 17, but whoever has this world's goods and see his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? So John's saying, how is it possible that as a believer that we go out into the world and we see this brother who's struggling mighty, and we have the ability to help him. Now you realize you don't always have the ability to help someone. But sometimes God gives you the ability. And John's saying, you go out there and you see a brother who's struggling, and in some way or another, God has given you the ability to help him. And you go, not do it. Not going to do it. And John looks at us and he says, well, how does the love of God abide in you if you could do that? How is that possible? And then he summarizes it in verse 18. He says, my little children, let us not love in word or in tongue. Don't be all talk. Don't just be talk. Let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. The truth is, love is God, God is love, and so we should love. And love is proven in action, not just in words. It's a beautiful thing when you really see believers loving one another. Don't just say you love them, and don't misunderstand that either, because you should say you love them. They should hear that from your mouth. But don't just say it, also show it in deed and in truth. What's the old saying? Talk is cheap. It can be. But you back up your talk with deed and truth, and it's a beautiful thing. My favorite verse in all the Bible, and I have a lot of favorite verses in all the Bible, but I think this is really my favorite verse in all the Bible, and so I chose to end with it today. It is the greatest example of love, and I want to be able to love this way. It is Romans chapter 5, verse 8. I'm sure you already know the verse. It's already came to your mind. Such a beautiful description for love. You ready? Here's what it says. But God demonstrates his own love toward us in that while we were still sinners, Christ loved us. Christ died for us. You know what that says, right? It says, while we were still sinners, while we could have cared less about God, while we didn't love God, while we didn't care anything about God's people, we didn't care anything about Christ, we didn't care anything about anything hardly. And God still loved you. God still loved you so much that he didn't just say, hey, I love you. He went and he died for you while you were still sinners. He proved his love for you as no man can, while we didn't love him at all. Would you stand with me? So, if I was to ask you the question, do you love one another? It's pretty easy to answer. It's easy to answer in word, right? Because I really do think I love you. I believe that I do. But is that proved in deed and truth? That's what I have to ask myself. Not that I'm just able to say the words. So, do you love one another? Do you love one another? Let me ask you this. Have you been hurt by someone and you're not over it? And how do you know you're not over it? Because if you could, you would hurt them back. Have you been hurt by someone and you're not over it? Have you hurt someone and you haven't sought forgiveness for that? Does your anger control you, or does your love control you? That's the contrast that John gave us today with Cain and loving one another. Are there some things in your life that you just need to let go of? Just get them out of your life before it turns to bitterness. We're going to sing, and as we sing, if any of those things are just flooding your mind, you need to talk to God about them, and I invite you to come. Maybe you're here today, and you've never given your life over to Jesus, and so that makes it hard for you to love one another. If you'll come, I'll share with you how you can know the love of Jesus and how He can change your heart. But however God has spoken to you today, as always, this altar's open so that you can come and you can just bow before God and just pour your heart out to Him. You come and do that as we sing.